Hello, good morning. Um, Centrell, you're our first participant, so we'll give others a few minutes to hop on the call. And if no one else joins, this will just be a conversation amongst the three of us. But we'll give everyone else just a few more minutes, probably getting started at about 3 after, um, or maybe 4 after, just to see if anyone else is hopping on to join us. But in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind dropping the name of your organization and if you've ever purchased products from an international manufacturer before into the chat. I think I'll give it one more minute, Christian. What do you think? Yeah.
Start some trouble. What trouble? Yeah.
Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. So today's training is focused on the selection of domestic versus international manufacturers. So kind of talking about the different type of manufacturers that exist within diapers and other products. So just to start off, my name is Jessica Hernandez. I believe you've been at past trainings, but just a quick overview. I'm the Director of Operations here at Supply Bank. So I oversee all of our warehousing, logistics, and procurement, and I'm used as a resource as the TTA provider for these topics. So as you likely saw upon entering today's training, this is being recorded and will be posted on ACF's website within the next 2 weeks. Christian will also be dropping a link in the chat to the ACF website where you're able to rewatch past trainings if you're interested, or if you missed any and would like to catch up on those. So as we go through today's training, feel free to drop questions in the chat or come off mute and we can kind of answer any questions as they come up. So today's agenda, we're going to be talking about domestic vendors, international manufacturers, product samples and testing, social and environmental audits, pros and cons of working with a domestic versus an international option, and then some time at the end for any questions or open discussion. So first starting off with domestic vendors. So a vendor is an organization that purchases and distributes goods to consumers and businesses. So kind of thinking about this in the context of diapers, the organization such as like Huggies or Pampers, those are the brands, but they're also the vendors. While kind of behind Huggies, you have Kimberly-Clark as the actual manufacturer of the diapers. And behind Pampers, you have Procter & Gamble as the actual manufacturer of the diapers. The working relationships between these four organizations are, I'm sure, much more complicated than this, but this structure kind of helps to frame how you think about a vendor versus a manufacturer when thinking about, the brand name of the diapers versus who's actually manufacturing the diapers. So for the most part, with domestic options, you're going to be working with the vendor or a broker who works on behalf of the vendor. So a broker is a third-party organization that is authorized to sell products on behalf of a vendor or a manufacturer. So a lot of organizations like your Kimberly-Clark or your Procter and Gamble work with brokers to distribute their products instead of working with businesses directly. This allows them to kind of focus on, their core operations around um, actually producing the products. It also gives them a, broader reach. That way they're, potentially delivering products to a broker who's then warehousing them and then delivering them to smaller, businesses or individual consumers, depending upon the setup. So just kind of a question, food for thought. Can anyone think of an example of maybe another vendor or manufacturer in the US diaper market beyond, Huggies, Pampers, who else maybe comes to mind? And feel free to drop that in the chat or come off mute. Yes, Christian. Yeah, the Honest Company. They make diapers along with, I'm not sure if they do diaper rash cream, but I know they do some other baby focused products like, shampoos, body washes, etc. Great. So kind of switching gears, we'll look now at international manufacturers. So a manufacturer, whether it's international or domestic, is the organization that actually transforms the raw materials into the finished product for the purpose of selling those products. So again, going back, Kimberly-Clark is the one who's actually manufacturing the diapers that are then branded and sold as Huggies. So most of the time when you're thinking about international options, you're potentially looking at either working directly with a manufacturer, so an organization that's based in another country, Mexico, Canada, China, Indonesia, et cetera, that is producing those diapers there and then selling, and then they're able to be sold in the US market. So you can work directly with the manufacturer, or in a lot of cases, you'll be working with a broker who's at that point adding their own fees onto the diapers. So they're going to add, a couple cents onto every diaper to make their own profit. And additionally, they're likely going to be handling any sort of import of the product. So they'd be the ones arranging for the product to come through customs and be able to be distributed within the US. So kind of thinking about finding international manufacturers. So there's options, to have direct relationships. So this can kind of be done through either, just a general Google search. There's also a few different organizations that you can actually pay for memberships through that will then provide you a list of international manufacturers, and I'm happy to share those names. If anyone's interested, feel free to shoot Christian an email, and I can kind of send over a list of where you might be able to access that information. But so by setting up direct relationships, you have a direct relationship, which means you're going to get the best pricing possible, but it also means you're responsible for conducting your own vetting and testing of the products. So making sure that the manufacturer that you're working with, is in good standing, is a reputable business, that their products are suited for, testing and, distribution in the US market, and that the organization is, in good standing with the US government, and you're actually able to import and purchase their products. While if you're going through a broker, you have less control over the relationship. You're not going to get kind of the bottom line pricing because they will add their own markup onto the pricing, but they are likely going to handle all of the vetting and testing. So, as the broker who's then responsible for importing the products, they're going to be making sure that the manufacturers in good standing with the US government. They're going to be making sure that everything's up to standard, and really kind of take on all of that liability. That way your organization isn't taking that on. So ultimately, whether you're kind of doing a direct relationship or working through a broker, a lot of that comes to staff capacity. Do you have time and someone on staff who's able to manage that direct relationship and make sure that, everything is up to standard and in line with US standards? Or do you need to work through a broker who's really going to take on all of that responsibility, pay a little bit more of a premium, but then you're not having to worry about, customs and that sort of thing like you would with a direct relationship? So when thinking about international manufacturers, there's a couple different things you're going to want to think about beyond just the, finding them. You're also going to want to look at product samples and testing. So with that, we talked a little bit about this at the RFP training back on the 25th. So I'm curious, for those who attended that training, does anyone remember any of the items that you should be collecting feedback on when you're reviewing your product samples? And feel free to come off mute or drop those in the chat if anyone remembers. Or if you have your own ideas on what items you'd like to collect feedback on from kind of participants. Nope, that's completely fine. We'll talk through it a little bit again. So as you're doing your product sample reviews, you're going to want to do that to include stakeholders. So that's, not only stakeholders from your own organization, but also potential other organizations, perhaps some parents that are going to be receiving the diapers, local healthcare connections. So if you have a relationship with a local clinic or hospital, and, kind of getting their feedback in terms of the quality of the products. You're also, when doing this review, going to want to look at qualitative and quantitative information. So for qualitative, you kind of are going to want to develop a survey for stakeholders to rank the items on a scale of, 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, based off of the visual appeal, the feel, absorbency, etc. Keep in mind that these items are items that, in addition to your stakeholders' opinions, you can also have scientifically tested to really understand, what is the true absorbency of a diaper. Similarly, for kind of, the quantitative, you'll want to make sure that your stakeholders are reviewing the products, touching them, feeling them, and providing feedback. That way, you've kind of got all of that recorded, whether that's stakeholders, recording notes throughout, or it's having a note taker in the session to kind of review all of the feedback. With product testing, again, we talked about this a little bit last week. You can definitely do this for domestic, but I would say for domestic, they're going to have already done all of this themselves and can provide you with any sort of testing documentation should you require it. For international, while a lot of them will likely have done this and can provide it to you, we do recommend doing your own third-party testing, since you are going to be importing a product that was made outside of the United States. You really want to make sure that you're in compliance and there aren't any potential red flags that come up with the actual product itself. So you're going to be looking at, both regulatory, so looking at your federal and your state laws. So that's packaging and labeling compliance, that's lead and heavy metal testing, that's FDA compliance if applicable. And then for states, different states have different requirements. So us here in the state of California, we have a variety of different requirements that we have to fall within, such as like Prop 65, and some specific regulations around plastic bags, and what those look like for items that come in plastic bags. I know states like New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Virginia all have similar regulations around plastic bags. And there's a wide variety of other, state by state regulations that exist out there. For the current grant recipients, Virginia and Washington are kind of the two states that come to mind that I know have some very specific state by state regulations. But that doesn't mean your state doesn't have some. And this is something that testing companies will know and can provide recommendations on based off of you sharing, where you're located and also where you'll be distributing the products. They'll help make sure that you're aligned with your state and federal compliance. And then finally, you can do that performance testing. So this is doing the testing for the absorbency, testing the elastic strength, and kind of doing those other pieces of testing to make sure that the product performance is what you want it to be, and that it's, matching the standards of, even though it's an international product, it's still holding up to the same standards and quality as potentially, a domestic product. So again, similarly to kind of what we talked about last week, with any international manufacturer, you're going to want to be doing a social and environmental audit. So these are really key for international vendors. Again, you can do this for domestic vendors. Any domestic vendor can likely provide you with this information if you request it, but it's really key for international just to make sure that you're in compliance. Social audits ensure that vendors or manufacturers are socially responsible. And so it's looking for compliance with local and international labor law, looking for human rights violations, and then ensuring that there's safe and hygienic working conditions provided. While an environmental audit is assessing a vendor's environmental management system and determining whether they're environmentally responsible. So that's looking at the actual, manufacturing facility and, what does the air pollution look like? How are they managing their waste? Is there any possibility for soil contamination? Are they efficiently using their resources? So all of this kind of comes together into a score that is provided to you by one of the audit companies. Depending upon the company, they're graded differently. The ones we've worked with in the past kind of do like an A through F scale. So similar to school, A is, 100% glowing, passing with flying colors. F is a fail. It means they're not up to standard, and the audit company would likely not recommend that you work with that manufacturer. So if you're, potentially looking at doing environmental or social audits, the 4 companies listed here are large international agencies that do social audits, environmental audits. All 4 of them also offer testing for products, along with a whole host of other services. They also all operate, like I said, internationally. So whether you're looking at Canada, Mexico, somewhere in Asia, even Africa, Europe, like really anywhere outside of the US that you could potentially be exploring international vendors. Any of these 4 companies will have a testing agency or auditing agency that should be able to assist. So now kind of switching to the pros and cons in terms of domestic versus international. So kind of before I run through the pros and cons, does anyone have just off the cuff as something that they might think of as a pro for either domestic or international? And why it might be beneficial to work with one over the other?
I'll share, Jessica. I think a pro for domestic is that the shipping is faster. Does that sound right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And that's, I know you value that from our experiences in the past, and that's definitely one of the pros that I have on the table. So kind of moving on to that, as Christian said, faster shipping times is definitely a pro of working with a domestic vendor. You're also likely to have stronger labor protections, physically closer to your supply chain. So depending upon who you're working with, if you wanted to actually go see their operation, I'm not going to guarantee that Kimberly-Clark's going to let you into, a manufacturing facility, but it's likely to be an easier ask than if you're working with an international manufacturer. Finally, by working with a domestic vendor, you're obviously, playing into kind of the made in America marketing, able to advertise that you're working with an American company with, American made products. International manufacturer, some pros. You're going to have a lower product cost. You're potentially also going to have greater product variability in terms of the ways in which items can be customized or the options available to you. There's opportunities for what are known as white label or branded products. So this is a kind of a base product that has no branding on it that you can put the brand of your organization on and really market it as, the 3DRP diapers or however you'd want to market it to your community. And then having direct manufacturer relationships works well within economies of scale and really being able to get the lowest price point for the amount of diapers that you're providing. So then kind of before we go into cons, does anyone have any thoughts around what some cons could be for either domestic or international?
The con could be it's more expensive.
Which one?
I think domestic would be more expensive.
Yeah, so great. That's the first bullet point I've got. So domestic does tend to be a higher cost in terms of, you're paying for higher labor standards, you're paying for that Made in America label. So you're going to see a higher cost product. With domestic, you also, have a higher risk of running into labor shortages. While that's not necessarily your problem, it is something that could come up with working with a domestic vendor, that they may have longer turnaround times because they're dealing with labor shortages. Similarly, while products are technically assembled in America, more than likely the raw materials are being imported. So, you're not necessarily having your supply chain being all the way from the ground to finished product in terms of being made in America, just having the finished product assembled. And then some, domestic vendors are really only willing to work with high volume customers based on, purely on financials. And so really kind of looking at the bottom line and what the, profit's going to be for them as a vendor before determining whether or not they're willing to work with you. Some cons for international. You're going to be dealing with import fees and potential tariffs. If you're working with a broker, this is likely something they'll be responsible for. But if you decide to set up that direct relationship, it's something that your organization will have to deal with. You're also, like we talked about, going to have to deal with product testing, social and environmental audit fees. You're going to be looking at longer shipping timelines, particularly if you're going somewhere overseas. You're going to be dealing with, overseas shipping timelines. I'm sure a lot of you remember when that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal and how that really was a huge impact on the international shipping supply chain. That probably happens once in a lifetime, but it is something to consider when looking at international manufacturers. You also potentially run into consumer bias, a brand like Huggies, like Pampers, like Love's. Those are known, established US domestic products. Looking at an international company and importing it and providing it to your families and your communities, there is a chance that it could be perceived as less than. And so you may need some consumer education to help them understand, why the product is equal or potentially superior to the name brands they know. And then finally, limited oversight. With an international manufacturer, you're not able to, unless you're willing to travel to China, you're not really able to, on a regular basis, visit a factory and really understand what they're doing and how the products are being made. And so it gives you less of an insight into kind of what it looks like on a day-to-day basis and how your products are being produced. So with that, the remainder of our time will be used for open discussion. So feel free to come off mute or drop questions in the chat. Christian and I will both be available for a bit here if there are any questions. And I did just want to say thank you to you all. This is currently the last official training that we have scheduled. There will likely to be other ones to come over the summer. But thank you all for your participation in these over the last, 2 months. We've greatly enjoyed working with you all on this piece of the project. This will be recorded and available on ACF's website within the next 2 weeks. And I also did want to mention that we'll be launching office hours later this month. So this is opportunity that grantees will have to actually schedule 30-minute meetings with, myself, Christian, or Justin to kind of discuss any questions, challenges, et cetera, you may be having one-on-one. So that's something that Christian will be sending out either later this week or early next week, and is available to anyone who's participating in the diaper demonstration pilot. So feel free to, keep an eye out for that email. And if you need 30 minutes of our time or even an hour of our time, we're definitely here as a resource for you all. But again, thank you for coming today. And if you have any questions, feel free to come off mute or drop them in the chat.
I have a question. So because it's a lower price point for international vendors, that's obviously a perk, but is there a threshold like that you would need to be ordering in order for that to make sense for a grantee?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Christian. Thank you. So there's not necessarily, I think depends on the manufacturer. Most of them are going to have what are known as MOQs, minimum order quantities. And those are going to be probably higher than if you're working with, someone who's domestic. That being said, depending upon how many diapers you would need to order to meet those minimum order quantities, you could be looking at procuring enough diapers for 6 months. At which point you're getting a lower cost diaper, but you're going to have to store it for 6 months. So it's a question of, do you have storage space for 6 months of diapers to be able to import them, store them, and then distribute them? So it's like one piece in a very large puzzle in terms of, all right, we've got a lower cost product. Where can I put it? Do I have enough space to hold 6 months worth of diapers? At which point, maybe international is not the best option for you at this point, unless you're able or willing to invest in a larger storage space. I think from my perspective, in order to be able to make international work, most vendors are also going to want to see consistent ordering. So they're going to want to know that you're going to be ordering not necessarily every month, but once a quarter or every 6 months, just so they're able to build it into their production schedule. So, with a 2-year pilot, that's a conversation to have with an international manufacturer to see if they're willing to take on business for, 2 months or 18 months at this point, and work you into their production schedule, or if it's kind of a longer term conversation, with the hope that there's additional funding available for this program in the future, and it's something that can be consistently integrated, in which case you are able to order products on that, quarterly or semi-yearly basis. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you for the insights. That was helpful.
Of course.
I'm also curious about, I thought of another diaper brand. If you go and you're purchasing at Costco, can you order from whoever there? Do they use a broker?
So Costco's a fun one. And I don't know, I feel like some of you on the call may know this or may have discovered this. But Costco diapers are actually Huggies diapers. They're manufactured by the same manufacturer, so Kimberly-Clark, that makes Huggies. They're just branded as Kirkland diapers. So I don't necessarily, Costco does have Costco Business that you can order from, that I believe is a lower price point than like Costco Consumer, like if you have a Costco membership and walk in there and buy diapers. But in terms of, being able to buy from the broker or the manufacturer that is producing Costco, you're ultimately going to end back up at Huggies and Kimberly-Clark. So, and that's true for a lot of like kind of Kirkland products at Costco. They're generally manufactured by Beyond Diapers, by someone else that is also like a mainstay brand. They're just doing a Kirkland labeled product. And I don't know if Sam's Club also has diapers, but I would assume if they do, it's probably a similar situation. I'm a Costco member, so I've looked into Costco in the past and where their diapers were coming from.
How about Amazon?
Amazon does have a private label brand, Mama Bear. I don't know who manufactures Mama Bear, but it's probably something with a little bit of internet sleuthing that you could figure out. Now you've got me curious, and I'll probably look into it after this training.
Thanks for indulging my questions. I appreciate it.
But no, so there's definitely, I think, Amazon similarly has a business wing where you could likely set up a business account and do business pricing. I would be curious to know who is manufacturing those diapers for Amazon, as that's potentially another option to look into in terms of, not necessarily getting pricing from Amazon, but kind of the middleman and seeing if that's an opportunity. And similarly with Target branded diapers, I don't know who does them for Target, but it's going to be the same kind of thing as like the Kirkland brand, the Amazon brand. It's likely one of the big diaper manufacturers is doing that for them. That way they can be branded as Target diapers, but they're technically the same as something else. Yeah, of course. Happy to help. It's once you start looking into the private label branding, it's really interesting. This is like a complete kind of aside to the whole thing, but like the whole who makes the Kirkland products, who makes the, Sam's Club, Target branded, Walmart branded, like any of those. White labeling, private labeling is just a really fascinating industry. And kind of, for me at least, gives a sense of how small American manufacturing really is. Once you start to learn that kind of everyone's making everything for everyone and that they're all interconnected. So yeah, it's definitely really interesting. And diapers are a small world at the end of the day. You know, there's only so many US made brands before you kind of run out of options. Yes. Yeah, I did know that Loves and Pampers are the same manufacturer but two different brands. And I'm not exactly sure why they brand it that way. I'm assuming it's some sort of maybe difference in materials or the sensitive versus non-sensitive diapers or something like that. But I did know that. Thank you for clarifying that, as others may not. If there aren't any other questions, you know, feel free to take your time back for the rest of the day. And Christian and I will be here for another few minutes if anyone does have anything. Diaper cream. I know Destin is the really big one that a lot of organizations are using. I don't have brands off the top of my head, but Central, I think we have your email and I can we'll follow up with you directly afterwards regarding the diaper cream beyond the Destin.